I've enjoyed working with Suzi for several years now. It's like she was saying a moment ago, she's a transplant to the area. She grew up in Savannah, Georgia. Spent some time at Milligan College, which kind of introduced you to the area. She was a librarian for the New York City public library system. She's been a librarian for 25 years. I know she looks so young to me, right? She's been 25 years. And she is just a great reader. She has 3 sons. And let's see, Henry will be in kindergarten. Charlie will be in second grade.
Yeah.
Wow, so that means Oscar is in 4th grade. Wow, that time has gone by very quickly. But she and her husband Tim have now settled in this area, and I just feel that we're so lucky to have them. Tim is from Texas, so we're glad to have these folks in East Tennessee. So we're just going to talk about books today for you that middle school kids love to read. And I really want to define the term book talk. I was really surprised when we started preparing for this. And Nancy Atwell was the first person to kind of pin book talk, that term, and it was just very informal, very casual. You just took maybe 5 or 10 minutes on a Monday morning just to ask kids, well, what have you read over the weekend? What did you like about that? Or to show them, well, I was reading this, you know. And I was really surprised at how teachers have taken that and they're assessing it to death. I mean, there were thousands of rubrics online for grading students on book talks, and I was like, oh, that's just crazy. That's not what it was meant to be. And so when we use the term book talk, it's just very informal, introducing the book to a kid, or just encouraging them to tell you, well, I really like this book because, or I didn't like this book because, you know, not any kind of formal assessment associated with it. So I just wanted to make sure, because out there, you may have been exposed to, well, we're grading it on, well, you know, all these little check marks, and that's not, when we think of book talk, what we're talking about. So, all right, so Suzi.
Well, and you'd be surprised at how universal that is too, because I teach mostly elementary students at this point. I teach weekly 6th grade, well, kindergarten through 6th grade on a regular basis. But I have middle schoolers that come in periodically, and book talking reaches every age group. It really does. Even if the middle schoolers act like they're too cool to listen to what you've got to say, they'll come afterward and say, hey, Mrs. Baumgartner, what was that book you told me about? And yeah, so it really does reach them, even if they're too cool to tell you that right at first. Yeah. So we're going to talk a little bit about encouraging middle school readers today. And my experience, I've been in libraries for about 25 years now, and in a school setting for about 5 years now. So I feel like this is what we're going to give you today is pretty universal information. So public libraries was my background. I have a master's in library and information science in public libraries, but working in a school setting is somewhat different. What we've got today for you, though, is pretty universal. You can make it work for whatever kind of environment you're in.
And we're really into personalized learning now.
Absolutely. Oh my goodness.
So this will fit right with our personalized learning.
Yeah, that is so true, because they are all so different. They're apples and oranges and bananas and cherries and pears and watermelons and all kinds. So the first thing that we're going to talk about is creating a reading space. And this is universal for whatever age group you're working with as well. Creating a safe reading space and encouraging them to do that at home too, because once you have that space that's inviting, something that's cozy and something that is fun and free of distractions, especially electronic distractions, then that is going to encourage your kid to go back there more than one time. So I've got a variety. Pam was telling you that I've got a variety of kids at home, a 4th grader, 2nd grader, and a kindergartner almost. And my 4th grader, he is super into nonfiction, and he has created a little corner of the house for himself where he goes, where his brothers aren't, distracting him. And it's just a really important time for him to get his cave time. So I know we're talking about how they're all different, and so that doesn't discount very social kids either, because they really need that too. They really need some non-distracted areas. So I would encourage you to hype that up with your teachers that you're going to be talking to encourage that. The next thing we're going to talk about is using food. What middle schooler doesn't like food? So I even brought you a cute book of food to show you. So if you're planning on hosting a book club or rewarding your class for getting through something together, this will make it more memorable. If you go out of your way and make something special, something unique. I was going to show you this really cute one. If you were doing like a book, I think I brought Hoot. This is a story, where is it? Hoot is right here. This is a cute little middle school story about environmentalism, and it is also about these tiny owls that have been burrowing under a building that they want to turn into a pancake house. But say if you're doing this for a book club, and then you go and make them some cute owl cupcakes. They're gonna remember that, and they love to eat. So food, using food.
And I know allergies are huge.
Yeah.
I mean, but there really are things that you can do that.
There's ways to get around it.
Yeah.
For sure.
That there's something for everyone.
Yeah, so I'll leave this up here for you to take a look at. This is an April Fool's kind of cupcake. It's so funny. So anyway, I like funny food. So food is a big thing, and yeah, it's gonna make it more memorable for them, and they're gonna translate that into other things. So let's go on. This one's a big one. Increasing fluency with fluff. This is not something that you'll like to say out loud a lot, because some parents are like, wait, what? Fluff fiction? This is kind of a big one though. So when reading becomes easier, it starts to build confidence in your student. And so I'm all about giving them fluff and then moving them up steadily. When they feel like they can get through something that's thick, I'm going to show you another for instance. This book, Wonderstruck, is huge. Look at the dimension on this book. But this I would consider also fluff. Because if you look through, half of the book here is pictures, right? Over half of this book is pictures. So there are graphic novels. There are, some nonfiction things that you could encourage. You could even have them read something that's a little bit below their reading level, that is good literature, and then that will increase their fluency and their speed. And by the time they finish that, they're going to be like, "Wow, look at this huge book that I completed!" And they're going to say, "I'm so proud of myself." And then they're going to say, "Hey, man, I actually am a reader. Look at this. I read this." Yeah. So I would definitely say increasing fluency with fluff is a really good way to get your foot in the door. Yeah. But make sure that you're balancing that. Especially within the school setting, you're going to want to balance like fiction that may be below their reading level, and then increasing and balancing out. I was telling Pam that I'm working through the Silmarillion, which is this dense book by Tolkien, and I have to do the same thing to myself. I have to, I've planned out my summer where I've got, 2 fluff books. Now I'm working through the Silmarillion, and then I'm going to reward myself afterward with 2 more fluff books. So yeah, it works for adults too. It doesn't just work for middle schoolers, it works for adults. And that's going to build their confidence and their speed. Let's move on to the next. Focus on discussion and not confrontation. What do you think that means, you guys? What do you think that means? Focus on discussion and not confrontation. When you hear that, confrontation just is kind of unsettling, isn't it? Yeah, but discussion, you think, okay, I can do that, right? So I think sometimes we overanalyze books. We hyper-focus on what we want them to get out of that book. But we're also reading it through a different lens. So looking at, let's see, like A Tale Dark and Grim. This one is a book about fairy tales, Grimm's fairy tales. And it's really a cool story. It's a fractured fairy tale. You love them?
I've read all of them.
I love them
everything
too.
he's
They're
written.
so good.
I love the Inquisitor's
Yeah.
Tale.
But reading them as an adult, you get a different message, don't you? Like reading as a parent, I got a completely different message out of it than I know most of the middle schoolers that I've given this to have gotten out of it. So when we focus so hard on what we want them to get out of it, it kind of discourages them and distracts them from a love of reading too. So I would say focus on discussion, open discussions, and see what they've got to say about it before you plow in and make it something that is a worksheet or something like that that is something overwhelming. So instead of asking test-like questions, you can have an open-ended discussion about the merits of the book or share your feelings about it. I'm not so sure how that works with the core literature, but if you're just having, if it's not during a classroom setting especially, this is when you can build trust too with your students. This is where you can really build trust with your students.
Have you ever done the thing where, and again, this is again,
Yeah.
when you're with middle school, because they are all
Yeah.
about that perception,
Yeah.
where, and at the time it was LeBron James that they were very into in the group that I had. And so we talked about that it was something, you know, they kind of have this misconception that they're either a reader or they're not.
Exactly.
You know, and so they didn't think that they could get better at it because they've not ever been able to get better at it. And they would just read one page, and I would say, I want you to read that page before you leave in my class. I want you to read that page again. And inevitably, because they had read it, they could read it again and read better.
Yeah, and faster.
And we
right?
talked about practicing, and it is really about how often you
And
read.
building fluency. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So when we build confidence with them, like with some fluffy kind of things, they're going to be faster, they're going to be better, and then they're going to say, hey man, I really am a reader. Yeah, exactly. And when we don't hyperanalyze things, they're going to say, hey, that was a really good story. And they're going to recognize the story for what it is. And that other stuff will come later. It definitely will. Vocabulary will come later. Plot lines will come later. But when we start building a love of reading and a wonder, a sense of wonder, that's when you're going to hook them, for sure. All right, let's move on to the next one, which is tie-in activities. I love themes. I'll just admit it to you. I love themes, as you can tell with my cupcake book. I love to build themes, right? And I think it's so fun because it encourages them to see so many different connections too. So building tie-in activities, you could bring in movies, you could bring in, like if you're doing something about poetry, you could bring in rap music. You could do all kinds of different things to tie all of these things in, and it will just make it more holistic too. And they're going to start recognizing literature out in the world, which I think is really a cool thing. So Pam and I actually did a book club at Providence, and one of the things that we did last year, we did the Westing game, which is a really fun mystery story. Within this mystery story, the Westing game, it's kind of a Clue-like situation where you see the perspective of all these different characters. And one of the things that we did was we played Clue with them. We played a lot of Clue. Yes, we did. Woo, too much Clue. But it was memorable for these girls that were in this book club. They really enjoyed that. And that was something that they were able to pick apart that story afterwards because they had thought about analyzing in the way that you have to analyze when you play the game Clue. So that kind of makes it a little bit more hands-on. You could do crafts, you could do movies, field trips, you could bake things. Just kind of depends on what your situation is at your school. Yeah, or you could even do an oral type of presentation where they take an aspect of the book that they liked and make that come to life in some way. So we have a history teacher at Providence, and she's so cute. She loves food too, and she knows that middle schoolers love food. So when she does her history units on specific units, like Colonial Day, she will have them all bring some kind of colonial food, and that's something that they remember. And even when they're in 12th grade, they're like, oh, do you remember Miss Carpenter when she baked these, whatever. She always bakes really good things, so that's memorable anyway. But yeah, so these are all really good ideas, and there's so many things you can find on Pinterest. Yeah, just finding all kinds of good ideas to make it come to life. Yeah. All right, let's go to the next one. This one's the most important of all. Find the right books. They are all different fruits. All of these kids are different fruits, and so it's not a one size fits all. So that means you've got to be able to offer an array. There's been a lot of research done about students making choices, about students making choices in literature, and when they choose, it is something that's more meaningful. So I know that we have our curriculum that we've got to get through, but making their own choice when it comes to books gives them a lot of power. And when you're in middle school, you don't feel like a lot of that is your control anyway, and so control is the thing for middle schoolers. So reading the right books, branching out, finding topics that interest your students, ones with quality writing and good storylines. Most of the time students who say that they're not readers just haven't found the book that they connect with. I wasn't a reader until 9th grade, and it was Pride and Prejudice that did it for me, which that's a different kind of story, yeah. My brother wasn't a reader until he was 21, and that was Harry Potter for him. So yeah, we have to find that right book. Even as adults, we have to find that right book that we connect with. So we have to be able to show grace to our middle schoolers as well. Eventually you're gonna find something that they love. So I think the biggest thing is to know your audience. And for me, that's super important because I have such an array. I have kindergartners through 12th graders that will come and say, Mrs. Baumgartner, I read this and I really didn't like this, but I liked this. So is there anything that's kind of like this for me? And that's when you can get them. That's when you have to kind of have a bucket list of books that you can pull from. And when you have their trust, then they'll come to you again and again and again. And that's when you build literacy right there. So you've got to, gain their trust. Okay, so if we give them some good books, that's where we're going to build that trust, and we're going to build good choices. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to talk to you about some of the books that are out there, because I'm not sure how familiar some of you guys are with some middle school reads. Middle school is kind of its own thing because there's a lot of crossover. Yeah.
We have a list of just kind of the types of literature that they like, and so what we'll do is we'll just kind of go through those types with some examples of the different types. So fantasy, I would say, is probably the number one with middle school.
For sure.
And then dystopian would be a close second. Graphic novels, and we're not talking, Jughead and Archie, the dime store comic books anymore. There are really, truly quality graphic novels out there that will get kids reading, that are reluctant readers. One of my favorites is steampunk, and steampunk has an interesting history. Of course, Jules Verne was the first steampunk author, and I love the story of Jules Verne, even how he got into writing, and he studied under Alexander Dumas, but at any rate, steampunk kind of really started in the 70s, but didn't really take off. But now it is really going through a revival. There's a huge movie coming out, Immortal Engines. I think you brought that one. I saw it in your pack. And I actually pulled up the movie trailer so you could see that. But it's a middle school. It's a middle school. Steampunk book that's gonna. Peter Jackson's making the movie. So
that's so cool. So the story, it's a really interesting story. I read it last summer. And it's been out for a little while though, but it's gonna make a resurgence whenever this movie comes out. It's about these traveling cities that consume other cities. So it's based in London, and London is on tracks. And there's all kinds of little mini stories that happen within it. But these cities consume other cities, and they use up all the parts and they use up all the resources. And it's kind of dystopian also because it's set way after something traumatic has happened to the earth, and now cities have to be mobile. So, but it's a really interesting read. I think.
Well,
that,
and when you think about with history too, the implications from imperialism and the scientific revolution and how all of that was driving it, steampunk is just great fun. But that book in particular is a really fun read. Girls, of course, they're always going to be interested in romance, and there's really the good, the bad, and the ugly out there. There's some that's just really trash that you should be aware of, but there are some really good romance books, and we'll talk about some of those. And then there really are some classics that middle school kids really do enjoy, believe it or not. And you know, we've talked a lot about building that stamina and really increasing readability levels, and at some point, you know, they really do need to be able to read Victorian literature, you know, especially if they're going to go on into college and postgraduate work. They've really got to learn how to read those sentences that are as long as your arm and comprehend them. So
but you can't start with steak.
No,
you got to
start.
Up.
You got to start with the appetizer, with the bloomin' onion or whatever.
For sure. Yeah.
So we'll just walk through some of these types. Everyone thinks The Princess Bride was a great movie, and very few people realize it was a book before it was a movie. And it was so that's a fun one that's kind of timeless too, and it's romance and adventure. But you go ahead. Well, I'll say something about Madeline England, because you know I'm a huge Madeline England fan. And her work is really having a revival too, because they just released the movie this summer, or England Time. But she's an interesting author. You see in her works where she really struggled both with all of the implications of an education and with her faith. You see that in her books, and I love that she volunteered her spare time as the janitor at the National Cathedral. I just think, you know, wow, you could go to the National Cathedral one day and there's Madeline England polishing the pews. But her books, people either really like them or they really don't like them. And they're kind of borderline fantasy science fiction. You'll see them in a bookstore under either category. But for your kids that are kind of geeky, that you know, kind of the ones that are into computers and your science kids, they will love those books because there's so much math and science tied into those books. And then of course, you know, it gets in, there's the whole battle of good and evil in the books. And I love the last book where the seraphim are actually characters. You know, but they're Newbery Award-winning books, and you just can't go wrong recommending Newbery books with your kids.
The graphic novel, oddly, like my daughter read the book and then we watched the movie, but then the graphic novel is really good. It gives a different perspective of that book, because I didn't like the book the first time. I wanted to like it, and I felt like I should have liked it. I didn't like it the first time through, but I appreciated the graphic novel for different reasons, because it had just a little bit of a different perspective.
Yeah, they're all of them. The Swiftly Tilting Planet and A Wind in the Door. There's actually 5 in the series, but the first 3 are the ones that most people read. But there's just a lot that kids will think about too, and think of the time and the passage of time. And when you get into A Swiftly Tilting Planet, and this is where one time when I didn't teach this book as a whole class, but it was a book that kids could choose to read with little groups. And so it was really fun because the science teacher worked with them about kind of the food chain. Because in A Swiftly Tilting Planet, of course, a butterfly gets squashed, which causes a bird to die, which causes a fox to die. You know, and so you have the whole catastrophe, you know, all because of a butterfly. So it's just great fun. But I mean, fantasy is just all of these types. When you look at middle school literature, they're all kind of coming of age story, because that's where those kids are. And so they really identify with characters that are their own age.
Mhm.
And so a lot of these books, one reason that they're popular is because the protagonist is a middle school age kid.
Struggling with all those things that you struggle with, identity and boyfriends and all of those things.
Yeah.
Yes.
One thing I love about the Rick Riordan books, and I think I've read all of his books now. I don't really like the Egyptian ones; they're my least favorite. But I'm not really into Egyptian mythology. So he's kind of really this renaissance of different cultural mythologies have come alive, and I love the ones with the Greek and Roman gods, because I think it's like 38% of all the words in the English language come from Greek mythology. Like if you ate breakfast cereal this morning for breakfast, that's cereal from Ceres, Demeter, the goddess of the grain. So helping when kids start to make those connections with our language and with so many, Western civilization. I love the Lightning Thief series, that first series, because they're fighting for Western civilization. And that book actually came out, the first one, just shortly after, September 11th, when we all could identify with fighting for Western civilization. So, and why is Western civilization important? So, and family is dysfunctional family in the Rick Riordan books and all kids. I mean, we all can identify with that, with how families can fight and argue. And the other thing that I really love that he brings out is that these gods and goddesses were created by man, and so they have all the flaws of man, and so I love that Percy kind of comes to realize that as he's growing up. So that's a great series. And of course you guys are all probably familiar with Harry Potter and the fantasy there. But and what are some other great fantasy books? I mean, there's just so many.
There's so many, yeah. Well, I'm going to show you a few, but just like Pam's talking to you all about these adult themes, these wonderful, dense themes, when you read through this, that's not the thing that you're going to pick up on. You're just like, wow, Percy's doing this, and I got to do that, and wow, this has just happened, and you get sucked into the story. So you don't even realize that, you've been fighting these battles with Percy all along. And with Harry, and so I think that's the beauty of a really good story. Yeah, so they may not even understand that they're going through all those things.
Have you ever read any of the Ray Carson series? Ray, R-A-E Carson. It's a fantasy series that's kind of new. It's kind of like a Harry Potter, but it's a female character.
Oh, that's cool.
And so her insecurities through the whole book, all 3 books in the series, her insecurities end up being how she saves her kingdom.
Very cool.
And so for some of the girls that kind of, I'm sort
usually
of
it's the boys
with
that
her,
are, it's usually boys that are a tough sell. They don't like to read girl protagonists, so most of the time you're going to see a male protagonist because otherwise it'll be too sissy. But I like it. I'm going to look that one up. Yeah, for sure. Yeah. There's another
Girl
really
of
good
Fire
one.
and Thorns is the title of the book.
Cool. There's another good one I didn't bring today, and it's Michael Vey. That one is flying off of the bookshelves in my library, and one thing that I love about it is Michael is such a good guy. He's such a good guy, and he loves his mama, but you don't read that in the story when you're in it. You're not focused on how wonderful a person he is. But I would love for boys to read this and try to emulate Michael. So those are really good too, Michael Vey. I'm going to show you a few others that jump off.
Is that the name of the book or the author?
That's the character, and so Michael Vey has all these different adventures. The author, I can't remember it right now. It's really good though, I promise. Mr. Monday is also a really fun series, and this is kind of science fiction and fantasy. A lot of them cross over. This one, he goes. This boy named Arthur is. He's having an asthma attack, and basically he's almost about to die. He's about to suffocate. And these 2 guys come out of the sky and give him this key because he's about to die, and they think that they'll be able to gift this and then take it right back. but it doesn't work out that way, and Arthur ends up having to fight through space and time, and it's a whole series. So Mr. Monday, and then Grim Tuesday, and like Wicked Wednesday, but they're really good too, and really action-packed. Some other really good fantasy. Doesn't have to have dragons to be fantasy.
Right.
They usually go for the dragon fiction.
Yeah.
Yeah, I didn't bring Aragon, but that's a really good one too, and that's dragon fantasy. And yeah, you'll either have the fantasy readers that love the dragons, or the fantasy readers that hate the dragons. So Ranger's Apprentice is not a dragon fiction, but this one is about a boy that is he's an orphan, and he's becoming apprenticed, and he really wants to be part of the army, but he ends up having to be a ranger instead. And the rangers are really good at sneaking up on people, and then there's this entire battle that ensues, and it's really gripping. It's very gripping. That one's really good too. I've thought of them. The Maze Runner, I'm sure you guys have heard of too. That one is flying off the shelves recently too. This one's kind of dystopian and fantasy.
Yeah,
It's
it's
a little bit both.
crossover. Mhm.
Yeah. So this one, this boy wakes up in a maze, and he doesn't know how he's gotten there, and he's with a whole bunch of other boys, and there's the maze closes and opens at different times, and they're basically like rats in a maze. And this one's quite good too. Let's see, I think I'll save some of the others.
Okay.
Yeah. Dystopian.
Yes, dystopian.
Yes. There was an article in the New York Times about why teens really like dystopian fiction, and it's mostly because they don't see it as dystopian. They don't understand it as a dystopian society. So that's pretty interesting. It just came out. Yeah, so Maze Runner we just talked about. And you'll find out, it's kind of a mystery as well, and you'll find out why they've been placed in this maze throughout the series. That's a really gripping story.
And I think the thing with dystopian too, though, as they grow and they learn, like they take their civics classes and their government classes, then I think that they appreciate it more and they understand it more.
Yeah,
But
and it's a good way to talk about socioeconomic differences, and there's so many things that you can pull into it. The Hunger Games is quite good, and it's a flashback to the gladiatorial system, and what a great way to revisit our history by looking at what could be our future. So I think that's a really gripping story as well. Among the Hidden,
I hadn't read
was
that
quite
till we
good.
did it with our club,
Yeah,
and
great. Yeah, those are
when
really
we
good.
did Among the Hidden, did you read Among the
I've read
Hidden?
them all.
We did that with
Right.
our little reading club at school, and I just
Yeah.
loved that whole series.
It wasn't as well, it's not as well known, but it's still really
Yeah,
good.
yeah. Haddix is really, she's quite good. I brought a few other things by her too, and that's something that's more science fiction. She kind of delves into both fantasy and science fiction, but this one was so cool because it was talking about genetics and all kinds of things. Yeah, and Divergent. It's not super well written, but it's a great story. Yeah.
Have you read Nevermore?
Yes.
What
yes.
grade level is that?
That's more high school.
I thought it was probably low.
Yeah. Neil Gaiman, right?
Okay.
Yeah. He ends up being a little bit more high school.
Yeah.
Yeah. Coraline was the scariest book I've ever read, though. Scariest book I've ever read. Yeah, and they usually put that in with teen, well not teens, but with middle school, because it's kind of a middle school read. But whew, that was a scary
Too
one.
intense, yeah.
Yeah. Then they made a children's movie
Yeah,
about
they made
it.
a children's movie.
That was just. Oh.
Yeah, but it was creepy too.
Yeah.
It was
creepy.
Yeah. The book was so much better though. And see, that's another discussion that you could pull in. What was different about the movie and the book? So in the book, Coraline doesn't need her neighbor friend to come and rescue her. She does it herself. Yep. So there are lots of things that you could pull in. So graphic novels, yes.
And like we were talking about, they're not the 10-cent comic books anymore. You know, these are really very well done books. I love the Diary of the Wimpy Kid books.
Yeah.
I just
They're
do.
great. They're about
They are,
bullies
and it's different for me
Yeah.
reading it as a parent, but they're so funny. And again, both boys and girls like them, although boys, I think, like those a little bit more. But, you know, like, just, there's, you know, the classic Odyssey, but told from stick men, you know, in a graphic novel format. And so reluctant readers will, they like those, you know, they're quick reads, and yet they can, like Susie was pointing out, they can get through the book. I think everyone should know about Shackleton, but no one knows about Shackleton.
Yeah.
You know, he led an expedition to the Antarctic, and it failed. They shipwrecked, but through his, you know, he persevered and didn't lose a single man. He got all of his men to safety in Antarctica, you know, at the turn of the century. But so many people don't know that story, and I was so excited when I was working on these slides. I was like, oh, they've got a graphic novel about Shackleton now?
Yeah.
Because all of the others are kind of really thick nonfiction reads, so.
Well, and I think it's really cool when they take classic literature and turn it into a graphic novel. I was going to bring you this so you can see the Hobbit, and you can just see how beautiful the illustrations
well
are.
done.
Yeah, and for someone that is reluctant to read, Tolkien is not where you want to start.
Yeah.
Yeah, so this is much more accessible.
Have you seen the Nathan Hale's Hazardous Tales
love
from
those.
History? Those are awesome.
So yeah, I have a fourth grader who reads like Consumer Reports and like huge, thick nonfiction items, but he will pick up a graphic novel and just pour through it. He loves those.
Those are great.
Yeah, those are really, really fun. And you know, if you want some nonfiction, they even have nonfiction. This is a story about Houdini, and it's really cool. So, and it's set to a graphic novel. Yeah, they're pretty neat. I didn't bring any manga because I'm not really a manga person. I like to read forward to backward. Frustrates me. So, but yeah, there's Gulliver's Travels, Treasure Island. There's all kinds. They've basically done most of the classics set to graphic novels. And so for my fourth grader that just does not like fiction, I think it's too stressful for him. He's very black and white. He likes, you know, I want to learn this and I want to take this apart and figure out how this works. But fiction stresses him out. But he loves the graphic novels of the Hardy Boys. I mean, they're very formulaic when you actually read the stories of the Hardy Boys, but set to a graphic novel is just a little bit more accessible. So, and I don't want him to stay here. I'm gonna help him move forward, but this is where you can start. This is a jumping off point for sure. So you can start here. This is the baby food. And then move up to hamburgers and then steak. Yeah. So, and they're for girls too. This is a memoir called To Dance. This is fantastic. This has won a lot of awards. And it is just a beautiful memoir about a dancer and the struggle that she went through with weight issues and all kinds of things, but beautifully written. And then you have fun things like Sparks, cats that pretend to be dogs, and all kinds of just silly, But graphic novels, they're a great jumping off point. I'm gonna leave these here for you guys to kind of peruse too.
This last year too, the Pulitzer committee created a special, it's the first and only Pulitzer Prize for Literature to ever go to a graphic novel, and it was to the middle school work mouse about the Holocaust.
That's so cool, yeah.
It is,
That's a
and they-
really good series to
And
read.
it's huge, you know, that a middle school graphic novel got a Pulitzer Prize for Literature this last year. In a very, they created even a new category because that work was so good. So don't, I know for me growing up, you know, it's hard to think of graphic.
Yeah. You think of Garfield and
You,
Calvin and Hobbes.
you've got to not have that in your mind.
Yeah.
There really are good reads with graphic novels now.
Yeah, and like if you want to analyze things, you could totally do that. So Brian Selznick that wrote this, he also wrote The Invention of Hugo Cabret, which they made a movie of that as well. That one was the most different Caldecott winner of all time, because Caldecott books the book award usually goes to a picture book that's, a thin picture book that you read to kindergartners. This is not a book that you could read to kindergartners. It's the same size, it's the same format with beautiful imagery too. But if you look through, I should have brought Hugo Cabret because that's actually one of my favorite stories. And you can see the way he does it is all black and white imagery, and it's about a French film, and you can even look around the edges of the pages in Hugo Cabret. There's a black line, so it looks like a screen. And there's just so many little details like that that he throws in that, it would be worth studying. It would be worth doing a literature study on. We're such a visual culture that graphic novels are here to stay. Yeah, very much here to stay.
Yeah, we may as well embrace
Yeah,
them.
we gotta embrace it. Yeah. Science fiction. Yes. All right.
House of the Scorpion's one that kind of crosses over too
Yeah.
with dystopian.
Yeah.
But I love it. It's about
Yeah.
cloning, and just a really, really great read. I haven't read the sequel yet. It just came
Yeah.
out last fall.
I just got into the library.
Did
last
you?
fall.
Okay.
Yeah. It's been out for a little while,
Okay.
but it's quite good, and it won a lot of awards. Yeah, so National Book Award, Newbery Honor, is it a Prince? Yeah, Prince
Yeah.
Honor. Yeah, so this one, that's really cool. It's about cloning, and I think this came out when, let's see, was it during Dolly? But I mean, think of all the things that you can talk about with cloning. So basically, it's told from the perspective of a child that has been cloned, and he finds out later, and
He doesn't
there's
know
a
he's a
mystery.
clone.
Yeah, he doesn't know. He's been kept away in private in a little house, and growing up like any other boy, except he's not ever allowed to leave the house, and he's been grown so
we
that
don't want to give too much away.
Yeah, I know,
'cause
right?
You should read it.
Yeah, it's so good. Yeah, but he is basically being grown so that he can be harvested. Yeah, so it's gripping and it's disturbing. Yes, but science fiction. So any kind of science fiction.
But the conversations to have with
Yeah.
kids
Mhm.
about that, just conversations. When we read that with our group, they really read.
They related
They
to a
really
lot of
did,
things.
and they
Yeah.
really were quite empathetic
Yeah.
with some of the characters. I didn't think they would be.
Yeah, and a lot of times you'll find they'll have a teacher guide in the back too with some of these classics like this. They'll help you out with some kind of questions if you wanted to do some kind of a book club kind of format. A lot of these are available online as well. We're going to show you some resources, some online resources that you can access for free too, that you can get good questions, good open-ended questions so that you can have discussions that are not super analytical, but will offer some good feedback. Yeah.
Can I
Interesting.
ask- I'm sorry. Can I ask you ladies about this with science fiction? I'm thinking about how it might hopefully overlap with some of the science classes. I'm not as familiar with the science standards. Have you ladies had any experience working with science teachers? Is there anything in these science fiction texts that lends itself to science standards where you might
Absolutely,
collaborate?
especially like with the House of the Scorpion and cloning, because they'll study DNA,
Right.
and they'll study the division of the cells and all of that, and it just ties beautifully in with
You
House
could
of the
make a whole
Scorpion.
unit out of something like that,
Right.
definitely.
Oh my goodness, so many of them. Or even like in 7th grade when they begin to learn how where the science names come from, the kingdom and the phylum and all of that. So many, that's Greek mythology again is a great way to tie in with that. But you could also, there are all kinds of the science fiction books that you can tie in with science.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, and as well as tying into science, like with the Percy Jackson books, you could tie
Yes.
that into history. You could tie
Yeah.
so many of these things
Yes.
into other subjects and make it a fuller subject. Yeah, a fuller.
And I've done that before.
Yeah.
I've worked out where the whole team was working together, integrating all of those, and it is just great fun.
Yeah,
And
because
the
then you
kids-
get to see that aha moments
Yeah.
where they're like, wait, I've seen this before.
Yeah,
that's
it's
so
really
cool.
exciting.
I don't want to deviate too far from it, but are you, like, if you've done that before, you've collaborated, like, I guess, interdepartmentally, what do? Do you just let, like, the science teachers, I mean, they probably have to go, a certain sequence. Do you let them kind of dictate what
I
and
did.
when, and then let the literature or the nonfiction support that?
I did. I would look at what history was doing and what science was doing when, and then I could work my
Okay.
literature things in with them. And it really does work. The kids
Thank
really
you.
do get that. And so all of the writing, even when we would do grammar, the sentences and things I would do, or we would pick up a book and, like if we were talking about, I think it was Jamie mentioned gerunds, in a book, we would look, okay, well, how many times does this author use a sentence with gerunds? What is their style, or find, for tonight's homework, if you're reading 10 pages, find at least one sentence with a gerund, so you can tie everything in. And it doesn't, you don't have to be doing a whole class set on one book. We've been talking about personalized learning. If you're letting them choose what they read, those skills would apply to anything, so.
Well, we even talked about like the Nathan Hill's in 5th grade. I worked with a teacher and they planned, I thought this was cool, because there were, because there's so much imagery on the page and they're speaking, it's like dialogue. How would you say, in a historically accurate way, the emotional, how could you accurately articulate what emotions you're seeing on the page? And the kids had to look at the images and really study their facial expressions. And that was like one of the hardest assignments, because they had a hard time necessarily like thinking about how to translate that into something you would want to write in a history book without it being bias. That was hard. That was a hard thing for them to do.
That's a cool idea. Yeah.
But, were there any other science?
Oh yeah, you have to know about this one. This one is incredible. City of Ember. Have you guys heard of this one?
Yes.
I've heard of it. So good. Yeah. So basically, this story is about two kids, Lena and Dune, and they grow up in this society, and they are underground. They don't know this. They're trapped underground, and they're running out of supplies, and so they have to do something about it. And there's all kinds of themes that you can pull out of this, friendship and teamwork and all kinds of things. But basically, they have to escape from this underground. It's dystopian as well.
It crosses over.
Yeah, it crosses over, but it's fantastic. A fantastic series there. What else?
But Candace, it's easy,
Yeah.
even with steampunk, to work with science teachers, because energy,
Yeah.
all of the
We get to
steampunk.
horticulture with this one.
Yeah.
In middle school standards,
Yeah.
like, I'm more, obviously, like, I'm more familiar with the high school, science standards, like you said, like the DNA, they really like focus on, cellular composition.
Right.
But I didn't know if there was something, I'll just have to revisit it. I was just wondering if you had that experience, if there was
Yes.
something that you, I don't know, that you did that you liked a lot,
Yes.
that worked well.
And it really does make a difference when all of the teachers are working together.
When you've got teachers that will collaborate with you, oh my goodness.
It's huge, and the
Yeah.
kids know it,
Mhm.
and they know that everyone's on the same page.
Yeah.
So, and we can help you with that. I can help you work with your teachers to do that.
Yeah.
Thank you.
One more Haddix book, because this one's
Yeah.
really cool. So this is called the Found series, or the Missing series. The first one is called Found. And the story starts, there's this airplane that shows up in the middle of the night. Yeah, and it's full of infants. It's just babies. And it's so strange the way it opens, but it grabs you right away because, it just shows up one day, and it's late at night, and then the FBI ushers everyone out of the airport, and then it flashes to like 12 years later, and then these children have grown up and they've been placed, and now they're starting to gather them and find out what the mystery is. It's a really cool series. But yeah, time travel and all kinds of, I'm not sure what you could do as far as like a science project with that one, but very interesting reads, yeah. So what else do we have? steampunk. We talked about,
Yeah,
mortal
we talked
engines.
about- The thing about steampunk is there's machines involved, and usually they're steam-powered machines, you know? So to think about the Nautilus, you know, from 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea, but they are just great fun. And again, your middle school kids just love them. I'm not sure I would have enjoyed them as much when I was their age, but I really enjoy them now.
Yeah.
So, but usually it is a character that the protagonist is always a character they can sympathize with in some way, with steampunk. So, and they're usually very clearly, you know, good and evil.
Yeah.
Yeah, good guys. No gray areas with steampunk. And I kind of like that about science fiction too. With middle school books, is there's no gray areas. It's usually good guys and bad guys.
Romance.
Yeah.
We both were like, you take this one.
Yeah, we didn't want to talk
It's not our
about
favorite, but
romance.
this book that Em found is fantastic.
Oh my goodness. I was so
we're both
surprised.
Shakespeare fans.
Yeah, I was so surprised to find a really great middle school romance book that was Shakespeare.
Yes.
It was like, I just
So
ran
great.
all over the school singing about this book. It picks up where Romeo and Juliet stop. Okay, so in the crypt even.
Yeah.
I mean, it starts with the funeral because
Yeah.
Juliet, yeah. So it picks up right from the moment it starts. And you know, when I used to teach Romeo and Juliet, I would always harp about how how Romeo was such an idiot. You know, he gets everyone killed. And so this book picks up with you always wondered, well, why did Rosalind, you know, she saw that
She saw
Romeo
everything.
was an idiot.
Yeah.
And so Rosalind and Benvolio are the stars of this book. And oh my goodness, it's just so well done. It's easy to read, and yet she still uses a little bit of the these and the thous, just enough that you get this flavor, and she ties it in to so many of Shakespeare's romantic comedies. You know, there's an aside to Much Ado About Nothing in it, and there's some of the classic characters that just kind of come through. So it's just a great fun read, and if
It's not too mushy.
And no, it's not
Yeah.
mushy. It really isn't. And there's a mystery and there's adventure and so I could highly recommend
Who's the author?
Melinda Taub, Taub.
Yeah, I totally went on Facebook and friended her.
Yeah.
Because I thought she was so great. Yeah.
Well, ABC actually did a mini-series
Yeah.
of the book, and they broadcast it last summer. And it was actually it was okay. It wasn't quite the book.
Yeah.
And then they didn't finish it. They didn't go all the way to the end of the book. They kind of left everyone hanging. And so, but it was exciting to see that even a TV series produced something Shakespearean. It was that popular, you know. So, but it's hard to find really good romance for middle school.
Yeah.
It's still, I mean, Louisa May Alcott has some fun reads. Besides, everyone knows Little Women, and Little Women's kind of having a revival right now because BBC and Masterpiece Theater just reproduced it. But if you can, she has some others that aren't quite as heavy, you know, like The Eight Cousins is a really good one. Under the Lilac is a really sweet love story. So I always think of Anne Shirley too. Anne of Green Gables is having a revival too. Netflix has just picked up, they're on season 2 now. I don't really like their version of Anne.
I did.
Did you?
I did.
I didn't. I thought it was a little too gritty.
Well, I think they did that intentionally. That's a whole other
I know.
conversation.
See, I'm more of a
Yeah.
romantic, and Susie's more a realist. So
Yeah.
I thought it was a little on the gritty side.
Yeah. But I had my fair share of Sweet Valley High growing up and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So, but the object is to make these guys a reader independently. So, if you gotta give them some of the Click or Gossip Girl, then you
Yeah.
know,
Well, I
I'll
always
take the
find
book.
like I can handle romance better if it's
Yeah.
like animals,
Yeah,
or it's
it's true.
the characters are
Yeah.
human. Like, I don't know. Like, seriously, like, there's this book, have you read The Under Me by Kathy Appleton?
No, it's right beside my bed. I'm waiting to read that. That's my fluff.
That book,
That's my fluff fiction.
that book to me is a romance novel that
Cool.
is perfect for 7th graders because
Awesome.
there are no humans in it.
Okay.
There's humans in it, but
Yeah.
they're the antithesis of love.
Cool.
And so I found that the group that I had, they were so low that you never really know what love is.
Yeah.
So the book does a great job of leading people into loving like behaviors. I know that
Yes.
sounds really weird.
Mhm.
Maybe I'm getting too deep, but anyway, it's like loving like behaviors, and then it becomes a relationship between a cat and a dog
Yeah.
under the violence of an adult. And so it's also got Indian history from the Louisiana area in it. And so I've read it probably 4 or 5 times, but if I had to read a book in that category, I just like it better when they're not human.
Yeah. Well, I prefer it when it's in other categories. So like Divergent,
Yeah.
that's also a love
Yeah.
story.
Yeah.
But we place that most likely
Yeah,
in
it's a
dystopian.
Yeah.
fusion,
Hunger
probably.
Games, same thing.
Yeah.
It's a
Well-
love triangle, but we put it in dystopian.
Yeah, well,
Because-
Percy Jackson, Percy and Annabeth, I mean,
Annabeth.
by the second
Yeah.
series, the Olympian, Heroes of Olympus series,
Yeah.
they're definitely an item, you know,
For sure.
so.
I did bring one though.
What's the
that's-
Shakespeare in Love? Was that a book?
I don't think it was.
Okay. Was that just
Yeah,
a movie?
Shakespeare in Love
Was it a book? I've only watched the movie, but I would imagine
Loved
that if
the
I was
movie.
going to read like a traditional,
Yeah.
more classic-y like love story, I probably could read
Yeah.
that.
Read Steel Star-Crossed.
Yeah.
It's
so good.
so good.
Okay.
Really is good, and she's so tongue in cheek too, and
Yeah.
she just throws in so many
Yeah.
really cool details. Yeah. So I brought a few realistic fiction, and that's more of my romance because
Yeah.
I just don't like romance books. I did read the Gossip Girl books, and whenever I was in that genre, so I did read those. And the thing that I did like about those is that I'm a preacher's kid, you know? So that was not my society. And I could see the things that these girls would do and say, whoa, I don't want to do that. And it was
That was your
so
reaction the
stark.
whole time.
Yeah, it was such a stark difference in reality that I could live it and not be a part of it. And so I thought that was my guilty pleasure back in high school and Sweet Valley High. Yes. But this one is quite good. Stargirl. I don't know if you guys have heard of this one. This is a classic too, and it's not really romance, but it's more about a really nice friendship. This one is about a girl that comes in to school and she's weird. She's real weird, and this was me. Yeah, and this guy befriends her, and they just have a really good. This is a really nice story. So something like that, I'm more into that.
We have a lot
Yeah.
of senior girls that were, when they are seniors and they're talking with middle school girls, they'll tell them
give
to
them
read
that. Yeah, it's so
Stargirl,
good.
yeah.
Yeah, it's, we don't call, like Pam and I were talking about coming of age stories and
Yeah.
how that's just not really a term that we use anymore because most of these books, that's what's happening. Yeah, they are
Yeah.
coming of age. And-
Really with all middle school books,
Yeah.
they're all, it used to be in literature, you associated like Tom Sawyer, or there were certain books that you always associated as the coming of age, or the real technical term was Bill's Dung Roman story, but with middle school literature now, they're all coming of age stories, so we try to avoid that term because
Yeah.
that's gonna turn the kids off.
Yeah, no one wants to read a coming of age story. It sounds awful. Yeah. So, but there are some authors that I would just like to highlight for you. Joan Bauer is one of them. If you have somebody that's more into the romances and more into like lovey-girly stories, Joan Bauer's fantastic, and she's not too gross. Too, you know, she doesn't get gross. So this one's Hope Was Here. Hope always writes. She changes her name from Tulip to Hope, which is a much better name. But this is all about like her. I think she's 16 in the book, and she's traveled so much. She lives with her aunt, and this is a coming of age story
Yeah.
because she's finding out who she is and how she fits into this new town in like Michigan and. Yeah, so Joan Bauer, I would highly recommend her for your romance stories.
I read Hunt's Upper Road Slowly too. Is
Oh,
kind
that's
of
a good one.
Is kind of a
Yeah.
classic for girls too. And when I used to give out my book list at school, I would put in parentheses by books that were for girls only. And so then, of course, the boys felt that wasn't fair, but there are some books, and Upper Road Slowly boys should not read. Yeah, but girls should read. It's really good.
Yeah. Well, basically, we are trying to develop independent readers, and when you give them good choices, they're gonna want to read more. They're gonna like the things that you've given them, and they're gonna trust you, and they're gonna say, "Hey, I like that book that you gave me about this and this. Do you have something else?" I brought along some nonfiction too, because I have a nonfiction reader in my household, and that's all he gets into. So there's all kinds of cool nonfiction things out there. This is the Bethany Hamilton story about, this is her memoir about the things that happened to her, and that's a really cool one. Like, usually nonfiction is a hard sell for me for girls, not so much for boys, but there's some really good nonfiction for girls. This one's Don't Sit on the Baby! So all about babysitting, because these are things that are gonna be part of their world right now. So look for things that things that are accessible for them, like babysitting is an issue right now for them. Like cars, that's an issue for my son right now. World War II, they're always into World War II. This is a really cool series, Guts and Glory. They do like Vikings, Civil War, like all these different genres of history. And I like this one because I think the author here, he's a blogger. And so on the back of the book, in most history books, the people are boring, the places are boring, the events are boring. This isn't most history books. So I like that. I think that'll grab your students and make them want to read for fun, because that's when you're going to get them. When they're reading for fun, that's when their minds are going to grow and expand, and that's when our literacy scores are going to go up. Yes.
When we think about, I also wanted to give, I feel like I have to give a nod to the classics when we think about increasing the rigor with reading. And even if you look at Goodreads lists of 100 most popular books, and those were rated by middle school kids, these top 4 are on there. Okay, so they're still out there, that and all of them except for, I think I've got a little nod to Henty in my notes here that I'll talk about, but these are still books that it may take them a chapter or two to really kind of get used to the author's style, but the topic is so interesting that it will keep them going. Most kids think that Davy Jones's Lager is from Pirates of the Caribbean, but that's from Treasure Island. Yeah. And our fish food, Long John Silver's, they don't realize that's and the reason that company took that name was because Long John Silver was the cook on the Hispaniola. He was the ship's cook. So there's just so many things that they'll begin to pick up on. There's still a lot of modern classics that always make those 100 great reads. I like to give a nod to Bridge to Terabithia, not just that one, but to Catherine Patterson in general. She has a tie to this area. She was a graduate of it's King University now. It used to be King College. Her parents were missionaries in China, so she grew up in China, and has 2, of course her children are grown now, but 2 adopted daughters from China, and she was a breast cancer survivor. And so she's still she's like 80 some years old now, and she's still like the chair of so many adolescent book committees, for evaluating books. So I love Patterson. The Chronicles of Narnia still make that 100 good reads. Now, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe is kind of considered more elementary, but when you get past that one, there are some really big issues in those books. Voyage of the Dawn Treader, yeah. There's some really big personal issues in that one. None of the movies have really done that book justice, but like when when Eustace is trying to get the scales off of himself, you know, he's really bleeding and torn, and
They can't make that Disney.
no, they
Yeah.
can't. So there's just, but once you get past The Lion, Witch, and the Wardrobe, middle school kids really do enjoy the other books in that series. Island of the Blue Dolphins, it's been around forever, but it's still very popular with middle school kids. It just resonates with them. I don't know if it's the character, Katana, or the whole situation, but they really enjoy that one. I love everything by Elizabeth George Spear. I am, you know, she was, anything that lady ever wrote, I just love, you know, from The Witch of Blackbird Pond to, I think my favorite, and I always had them do it at Providence, was The Bronze Bow. It won she and Patterson, and there's one more, the author of, the one with the kids who go to night out in the museum.
Oh,
Chronicles of,
Königsberg?
yes.
CO.
They're the only three that have won multiple Newbery Awards.
Yeah.
So you know their books are dependable. But I love The
And
Bronze
relevant,
Bow
too.
because it's so much about tolerance with faith and with personal choices, and the issues of mental illness are there, and that's really becoming a topic in our society that we have to deal with, and Elizabeth George Spear was writing about that, you know, in the 60s. So I'd highly recommend that one. Well, speaking of mental issues, Mrs. Frisbee and the Rats of Nim. I'll never forget one time I had a group of kids that were reading that book, and on my way to school that morning on NPR, they were talking about an incident that had happened at NIM, and I was like, wait. You know, so, but again, thinking about DNA and science trying to improve man, you know, there are some complicated issues there that the kids really enjoy reading about. Roald Dahl, of course, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory is big with the elementary kids, but some of his other books are really great reads for middle school kids. James and the Giant Peach, the BFG, but his short stories for adults, and kids would love those too. Because he was an Air Force pilot in World War II, and so, you know, Beware of the Dog is just an amazing short story about a pilot shot down behind enemy lines, and it's just a really, really suspenseful tale, but kids would really enjoy that. And he has a tie to this area too. He married Patricia Neal, who was a Tennessean and got her start at the Barter Theater. So I like to point that out about Roald Dahl. Hatchet, you guys are probably familiar with Hatchet. Boys just love it. I didn't like the sequel to it as well, but Hatchet is there. And the book that started it all for young adult literature was The Outsiders. And still, you know, it's a violent book, but it's still talking about the social cliques and things in school. It's
Still very relevant.
Yeah, it is still relevant today. So the modern classics, and then you know, we could talk about classics. I could talk about classics all week. So.
Well, and I also love that Barnes & Noble and some other companies and Penguin, they've taken the covers and redone the covers because really a cover sells a book. Yeah, we hate saying that, but it's so true.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Is
so.
a dear. Well, I just want, you know, when we talk to kids about how do we define a good book, and so when I do book talks with kids, and some of the things that I like for them to think about is permanence. You know, will this book be around for your kids to read? You know, or you know, why do you think Treasure Island has never been out of print? Has been why do you think it's translated into 7 different languages, and of all the books ever written, it has the most movie versions made from it. So you know, so permanence, you know, I like for them to think about that. Where will this book be in 20 years? Artistry, you know, just looking at how it just trying to help middle school kids begin to understand with their own writing, all the components to come together that really make it, how do we define it as artistry. How, I think of the universal appeal. Some books are for, I think about, well, Tom Sawyer's one, okay? You read that as a kid, and then when you read it as an adult or as a parent, it's got totally different meaning. There is some really creepy stuff in Tom Sawyer. I mean, really creepy stuff. What was Doc Robinson doing in the graveyard digging that woman up? They had her body in the wheelbarrow. I mean, they were taking it somewhere. So I'm like, okay. So, but books that appeal. I know, there's a lot of stuff to think about. So, books that appeal throughout all the ages, okay? So, I like for them to kind of think about that. Does it have a universal appeal, or why? Is it unique? Is it different from anything else? Why is that? Why is this book different from the other books? What's unique about it? What's the author doing differently? And I always like for them to think about, well, how can I use that in my writing? And then when I look at plot and characters, when I'm defining a good book, I always want them to think about a sense of justice. Is it noble? Truth? Just all of those, the things that we hope students are, if we're wanting them to be citizens, in a community that's uplifting to each other, qualities that we would look for. Honor, is what the characters, or is the plot admirable? What's going on? How would we define a good book? What about you, Susie? How do you define a good book?
Good has to triumph over evil.
Yeah.
For the most part, that's what it is for me. So I got in trouble with an author because I used to do reviews, and I don't do them anymore because they Google themselves, those authors. So there was a book that I did not like because in the end it was called Princess Academy, and I'm not going to name the author.
Is it the MR guy?
No, it's a girl.
Okay.
Shannon Hale. So yeah, I wrote this review about her, and good doesn't triumph over evil in the story. The girl that lies about her parents she lies about being an orphan. She's not an orphan. So yeah, and she ends up getting to win the prince, and so good has to triumph over evil. I'm a stickler about that.
Yeah.
And if good doesn't triumph over evil, there's got to be a reason why.
Yeah.
So, because what do we want our kids to be reading? Do we want them to be good citizens? Do we want them to make good choices? So I think if we are giving them a plethora of good choices, then they're going to see merit to what they've got in front of them, and that's what's going to stick. That's what's going to be the classics of tomorrow.
I always think of grace and redemption too. I think about one thing with like the Harry Potter series. I don't. It's hard to think of another character in middle school literature that's not redeemed like Severus Snape is. At the end when you read the books, you really see redemption there. So I like to see conflict resolved in that way.
In character development, the other one I was going to show you is this Chris Colfer. Chris Colfer is the guy from Glee, so they like that. So the Land of Stories, have you guys heard of those? They're really cool. They are fractured fairy tales, pretty much. This is the second one, but in the first one, you can really see some growth in these stories that you grew up with. The story of Cinderella. I remember there was one part in the story that, as an adult reading it, I was like, wow. That's so interesting because Cinderella is now, she goes from rags to riches, and within the story you kind of get her perspective of what it's like now being the queen, and how she used to be kind of a people pleaser, and now she's kind of had to grow into not really being driven by that any longer, and that's a grown-up concept for Cinderella to have to go through. And yeah, so I like it when when you see a lot of growth within your characters too. Yeah, I think that's what gives it some punch, and those will be our classics.
Yeah, our future
Yeah.
classics.
For sure.
Why don't we take just a quick break right quick, and then we'll we've got a couple more points and we'll wrap things up for you.